taking sides in what's seen as one of the world's most contentious relationships. US Defense Secretary James Mattis has sidelined Pakistan in an ongoing dispute with India over the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC.
I believe the Secretary...
General Mattis said it passes through disputed territory, essentially rubber-stamping India's opposition to the controversial plan.
With the North.
The disputed territory is part of the unresolved Kashmir conflict, dating back to the partition of the Indian subcontinent. CPEC begins by passing through a mountain range that India says is part of that territory. The corridor is the first part of China's grand One Belt, One Road project. It aims to link China to the Middle East and Central Asia through a series of railroads and road links. Beijing says it's purely to encourage trade, but India says it's part of a plan to encircle it and curtail its growing influence with help from Pakistan.
आंतरिक सुरक्षा हमारी प्राथमिकता समंदर हो या सीमा साइबर हो या स्पेस हो हर प्रकार की सुरक्षा भारत अपने आप में सामर्थ्यवान है.
Pakistani officials insist that India and the US are not just opposing the project verbally, but actively supporting militant groups to destabilize it through Afghanistan. And that accusation has got support from a surprise source. Former Afghan President Hamid Karzai, who accused the US of supporting Daesh in his country.
Daesh emerged first in Nangarhar, in Shinwar district of Nangarhar. The United States has a huge base in Jalalabad, in the central provincial capital of Nangarhar. They kept watching it, and from the very beginning, when you are there with the intention to fight it, but then a deadly terroristic organization like that emerges, and you watch it and do nothing. In addition to that, more than that, people reported that helicopters were coming and dropping supplies.
Karzai made the allegations during an exclusive interview with the Newsmakers, and last week doubled down on those claims in an interview broadcast on Russian television. That's likely to please China and Pakistan's leadership and lend credibility to what many have been calling half-truths or conspiracy theories. America's latest stance has also fueled speculation that a new proxy war may be launched in the region. And if that's true, three of the opposing sides are neighbors and nuclear powers. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from New Delhi by Tilak Devashir. He is the Indian government's former cabinet secretary. In Islamabad, Asim Sajjad. He's a member of the left-wing Awami Workers' Party. He is also a professor of political economy at Quaid-e-Azam University. And in Washington, D.C., Andrew Small, senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Thank you very much for joining us. Andrew Small, let me begin with you. Is the U.S. threatened by CPEC?
No, I think one can slightly overread the statement from Secretary Mattis the other week. I'm not sure that necessarily represents a consolidated view on the part of the US government. I think it would have been hard to imagine him making this statement without the fact that he'd recently come back from a trip to India. I think the US does share a number of India's concerns about CPEC and the Belt and Road Initiative, but in many respects, I think there's parts of the US government that are relatively sympathetic to Chinese investments in Pakistan as well and would like to see a lot of them succeed. I certainly don't think the US is overly concerned about the security role that China has there, Gwadar or these elements. I think there's a more balanced view than might be reflected just by looking at the Mattis statement.
Asim Sajjad, did Mattis describe policy or did he just misspeak?
It's difficult to say these days with an administration that seems to be all over the place. But, you know, I sort of tend to agree that I don't think that Washington has, as a matter of policy, is opposed to CPEC or is hell-bent on sort of blocking the way. I think that this is, there's a little bit of posturing. There's probably a bit of, let's keep the Modi government sort of happy. But I don't see, again, the Americans either hoping or actually even practically having any expectation that they can either stop China from influencing or investing in Pakistan, or that such a policy would even be beneficial.
Tilak Devashir, tell me why India might feel encircled by this deal.
Well, we don't feel encircled because of CPEC, but because CPEC, the route of CPEC goes through territory which we consider our own. And as the government has said, it's an illegal occupation of Pakistan. Therefore, we made our position very clear, both to Pakistan as well as to China. So it's not encircling if CPEC doesn't encircle us, but yes, it passes through territory which we consider our own. And we made that known.
Okay, so Asim Sajjad, from the Indian perspective, Pakistan and China are, I guess, establishing facts on the ground on disputed territory, or to many Indians, it's not disputed, it's theirs. Is this going to get Kashmir to flare up again?
Well, I mean, you can find 1,000,001 ways to get Kashmir to flare up, or for Pak-Indo ties to flare up. I think that, look, the reality of the situation is that if CPEC, or frankly any other regional cooperation agreement, is to succeed, there's just no chance of it. We can't live in Cold War binaries anymore that India and Pakistan are always going to be on the other side of a great power divide. I think that the reality is that these sorts of projects, if they are to succeed, are going to involve sort of multilateral cooperation. I can't see Pakistan and China doing business and India having nothing to do with it. I mean, I think that one way or the other, that is a that's a non-starter. And I think that's probably, I see the way forward being all of them having some kind of shared initiative, or none at all.
Andrew Small, for those who see something like this and go, okay, so it's Abbasi and Xi Jinping versus Trump and Modi, it's Pakistan and China versus India and the US, is that binary inaccurate?
I think it's inaccurate. I think there are real concerns on the part of a number of the parties to ensure that these kinds of blocs don't form. I think Pakistan is still keen to fix its relationship with the US. I don't think China wants to see a bad US-Pakistan relationship. At the same time, the dynamics are moving in a direction where there are elements of bloc-type behavior that I think were not there a few years ago. I think you see in the tensions between US and Pakistan, US and China, where the China-India relationship is going, that even when I think none of the sides want things to be heading in this sort of direction, I think there are pressures that are tilting it a little bit closer to sort of hardening lines that were previously somewhat softer. At the same time, I think there's enough of a premium that all of the sides place on not getting into this kind of zero-sum politics in the region, which would be so pernicious to all sides' interests, that I think there'll still be an attempt to keep a lid on that.
Yeah. Tilak Devashir, if everything goes according to plan, the power plants, the industrial zones, the economic zones, the roads and the bridges and the ports and so on, which includes it being built in territory that India believes is its own, what would India actually do in response to that if it all just goes ahead?
We've been looking at, I have been looking at the China-Pakistan economic corridor pretty closely. And it sounds very good on paper. It's a big opportunity for Pakistan. But the way it's being built in Pakistan is a game changer, or as if the keys of heaven have opened up for Pakistan. I'm not quite sure it is there. It's an opportunity that Pakistan has to capitalize upon. So I am not unduly worried about that. India needs to react right now on the way CPEC is developing. Even these special economic zones, which are being supposed to be built, we don't know the details. The problem with CPEC is that the details are not known. It's very, very opaque. Even the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan had to admit that he didn't know how much was equity and how much was debt of these $46 billion that was coming in. So I don't think so in India we're very worried right now, or what are these projects which are going to be passing through territory that we consider our own. We'll just wait and watch to see what actually comes out of it on the ground. And if I can just go back for a minute, if you allow me, to your previous question on China, India and Chinese trade is touching almost $100 billion.
Right.
So I don't see it in any camps that, China and Pakistan on one side or India and the US on the other. I think we have a very good multilateral diplomacy going on.
Yeah. Asim Sajjad, is it being billed as this magic solution to Pakistan's problems economically and so on? Because that was suggested by Tilak. Is that how people in Pakistan see it?
Well, I mean, I actually agree that there's very little public disclosure. There is sort of like this sort of magic wand-like sort of at least depiction that frankly, both Pakistan and the Chinese government are interested in putting out there. There is very little actual information. I think that, the problem I have with anything to do with CPEC or any such project is actually whether or not, at the level of states and at the level of this macro sort of perspective that we often adopt, whether we're actually able to capture the real impacts on the ground. Just because $50 billion is coming in doesn't necessarily mean that it's all, milk and honey. I mean, I think that's really what we wait to see. And I think that, internal conflicts within Pakistan would be a bigger concern for me than whether India or XYZ other countries is bothered by it.
Yeah, and in a couple of minutes I want to ask you about the internal conflicts, but I just want to stay on this point for a moment, Asim, because the Pakistani government has said this will usher in an era of unprecedented progress and prosperity. Forbes, on the other hand, had a piece that just came out saying the China-Pakistan economic corridor's biggest threat isn't India, it's corruption. And they speak of long delays and cost overruns and so forth. So is there the prospect of Pakistan getting bogged down in a big mess that was a beautiful idea, but because of corruption, it might turn out to be counterproductive?
Well, I mean, corruption, I don't know. I mean, I think that as anybody who's observing Pakistan these days knows that, as always, the civil-military fault line is a big one. So, political uncertainty, definitely. I think that before, when the CPEC plan was announced, there was a lot of disquiet amongst what we call the smaller nationalities in Pakistan about whether or not the benefits would be equally shared, or in fact it would be a Punjab-centric project. There's ecological issues, there's different sort of concerns, and those concerns will continue to be voiced. And I think the extent to which any kind of consensus, I mean, if this is the great game playing out again, then of course the people of the region may not benefit. And I think that's what supposedly development projects should be doing, is benefiting the people, rather than it be a calculus of whether states approve of these projects or not.
Yeah, Andrew Small, to take the great game metaphor and expand it, is China injecting itself into the great game? And might that be a reason why the United States is getting uncomfortable, because the US would like to be the indispensable power in the region?
I mean, I'm not sure this is a game that the US is exactly playing at the moment. The challenge for the US is more the fact that China is really stepping in on these big infrastructure projects, these big investment packages and things, in a way that the US really hasn't been doing, and a number of the multilateral institutions haven't been doing in the region for some time. There is a huge infrastructure deficit. There are real needs for a lot of these investments. There are, of course, serious questions about the way that China is going about doing it. There are a number of the issues that have been highlighted already: environmental, the opacity of the financing, debt burdens, all of these questions. But the need is there, and I think, in fact, the fact that China is stepping in to do this on such a grand scale is putting a certain amount of pressure on the US and others to rethink whether they should really be more serious actors in this space again, and whether the kind of Sino-centric version, if there are concerns about it, whether it might not be helpful to provide some good alternatives for countries themselves. The US had actually been asking China over a number of years to increase its investments in Pakistan, to step in and occupy this role. So I don't think it's purely operating in competitive terms. The question is more, what is the impact really going to be on some of the security dynamics in the countries, on the economic situation of these countries?
Yeah. Tilak, talking about the internal dynamics of Pakistan, just across the border from where you are in India, there's the rest of province of Balochistan. This deal, CPEC, might be a huge economic game changer when it comes to Balochistan and its economy, massive port and so on. Tell me how India views the potential for things to go right or the potential for it to go wrong in Balochistan.
You know, the reports that are coming out in the Pakistani media about Balochistan are not very encouraging. And I'm sure Sajjad will agree with this. Gwadar and the development of the routes coming out from CPEC have been planned without taking into account the wishes of the Baloch people. Gwadar is going to become a 5 million city, 5 million people inhabiting that. And the Baloch, the entire population of Balochistan, of the Baloch in Balochistan, is roughly the same. They feel they will become red Indianized, marginalized in their own country. There will be other people coming in from outside, from different parts of Pakistan and the Chinese, and who will just outvote them every time. Likewise, in the routes on the various projects that have been built are mostly in Punjab and in Sindh, and very few in Balochistan. So the Baloch are wondering that, look, Gwadar is our port, this is our land, what are we getting out of it? I'll give you one example of water. Gwadar faces a very serious drinking water problem. In fact, anecdotal evidence is that whenever burglars raid a house, they pick up water containers rather than anything else. And nothing has been done over these past, even the decades of the last couple of years, to help the people of Gwadar get drinking water.
Right.
So
yeah.
I'm not so sure that it is going to be a huge boost for Balochistan.
Yeah, Asim, how do you see it? Balochistan, is there going to be a problem down the road here?
Well, I mean, I think that so-called security concerns, the Chinese government has made these clear to the Pakistani authorities even before the project was announced. And, you know, Balochistan has been a hotbed of conflict for some time. Unfortunately, which I think the irony of this conversation is that that's precisely what the Pakistani state tends to react to, is sort of what they consider Indian meddling. And that then allows for the real long-standing historical grievances of whether it be the Baloch or any other disaffected group in Pakistan to be depicted as, you know, some sort of foreign hand playing out. And I think that is the sort of context from which we need to emerge if, as I said, you know, development is supposed to benefit the people. And if it doesn't, then I think it suffers a legitimacy crisis, irrespective of whether states you know, perceive those certain projects to be beneficial or not.
Tilak Devashir, Asim Sajjad and Andrew Small, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.